All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some ancient rules and rituals,
Okay.
specifically Leviticus chapter 15 from the King James Version of the Bible.
Right.
We're going to unpack what made someone unclean in ancient Israel
Right.
and what they had to do to get back to a state of cleanliness. You
Interesting.
ready to jump in?
Let's do it. It's really a fascinating look into a worldview that's very different from our own.
Okay, so Leviticus 15 really gets into the specifics of bodily discharges.
Yeah.
And we're talking both male and female.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty detailed stuff. What jumps out at you right away?
Well, I think the sheer level of detail is remarkable. It's not just a general statement about cleanliness.
Right.
It lays out very specific types of discharges
Right.
and what needs to be done in each case.
Yeah.
For example, for men, it mentions a running issue, which could be a variety of things, and also seminal emissions.
And for women, it talks about menstruation and other types of blood flow.
Right.
There's a real emphasis on how long someone is considered unclean and the steps needed to become clean again.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what was the thinking behind such specific rules?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It suggests that maintaining ritual purity was absolutely central to their lives.
Uh-huh.
Remember, this isn't just about hygiene as we understand it today.
Right.
It's about a state of spiritual wholeness, a right relationship with God.
So if someone had one of these discharges, what did they actually have to do?
Well, it involved a whole process of washing,
Okay.
isolation, and even offering sacrifices.
Interesting.
The text is very specific about these rituals.
Like, how specific are we talking?
It gets down to the materials involved.
Okay.
Earthen vessels that came into contact with an unclean person had to be broken,
Wow.
while wooden ones could be rinsed.
Okay.
There's even a mention of how spitting from someone who is unclean can contaminate someone else.
Oh, wow.
You can see how these rules would have impacted daily life on a very practical level.
It's interesting that you bring up spitting because that brings up the idea of contagion.
Right.
That uncleanliness could be transferred from person to person or even through objects. Was that a common idea back then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it wasn't unique to the Israelites.
Mhm.
Many ancient cultures had similar beliefs about ritual purity and the idea that certain substances or states of being could be contagious.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This raises an important question.
What's that?
Were these beliefs based on any practical observations, or were they primarily symbolic?
You mean, like, did they notice that certain conditions could spread through contact?
Yeah.
Or was it more about maintaining a symbolic order?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
We can see elements of both.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, practices like isolation and washing certainly have a hygienic function,
Right.
especially in a time before modern sanitation.
Of course.
But on the other hand, these practices were deeply embedded in their religious beliefs.
So it wasn't just about avoiding germs. It was about maintaining a right relationship with the divine.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the potential societal impacts of these purity laws?
Well, think about it.
Yeah.
These rules would have governed so many aspects of daily life.
Right.
Who you could interact with, what you could touch, even where you could go.
Yeah.
It's not hard to imagine how these practices could have created social divisions or hierarchies.
Yeah, I can see that. But
Yeah.
weren't these rules meant to protect people too?
Certainly.
Okay.
The text explicitly states that these practices were necessary to prevent the Israelites from defiling the tabernacle
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately to protect their lives.
Okay.
Purity was seen as essential for their well-being,
Yeah.
both individually and as a community.
Right.
So you have this fascinating interplay between social control,
Mm-hmm.
spiritual protection,
Yeah.
and even practical hygiene.
And what about the animal sacrifices mentioned in Leviticus? What was their purpose?
Yes, the sacrifices. Those played a key role in the purification process.
Okay.
It wasn't just about washing yourself clean.
Right.
It was about restoring a right relationship with God through a symbolic act of atonement.
Interesting.
The specific animals chosen for sacrifice, often turtle doves or pigeons, likely held symbolic meaning as well.
It's almost like a whole system of spiritual checks and balances.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this system, while complex, makes a lot of sense when you consider the worldview of the ancient Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
For them, the physical and the spiritual were deeply intertwined,
Right.
and maintaining ritual purity was essential for their survival and well-being.
Yeah.
And it's this very intertwining that makes Leviticus such a rich source of insight.
This is also intriguing. We've barely scratched the surface, and I'm already seeing Leviticus in a whole new light.
Yeah.
What do you say we dive into some of the social implications and the parallels we see in our own world today?
Sounds good to me.
So we've been talking about these ancient purity rituals in Leviticus, and it's got me thinking. Do you see any connections between these ancient ideas of uncleanliness and the way we view certain bodily functions even today?
Oh, absolutely. The echoes of those ancient beliefs can definitely be found in modern society. Think about the stigma that still surrounds menstruation in many cultures.
It's like there's this lingering sense of shame or secrecy, even though it's a completely natural biological process.
Yeah.
Do you think that discomfort could be traced back to these ancient ideas about purity and impurity?
It's certainly possible.
Okay.
Those ideas have been around for centuries
Right.
and have permeated many different cultures and religions. The notion that certain bodily fluids or states of being are impure can have a powerful impact on social norms and attitudes.
And it's not just menstruation.
Right.
We see similar attitudes around other bodily functions too.
Yeah.
It's like we've inherited a sense of shame about things that are completely natural and even essential for life.
It's fascinating how these ancient ideas can persist in subtle ways, influencing our behaviors and perceptions without us even realizing it.
Right.
It makes you wonder how much of what we consider normal or taboo is actually rooted in cultural and religious beliefs that have been passed down through generations.
It's almost like we're trying to sanitize and control these natural processes as if there's something to be hidden away.
And that raises another interesting point.
Oh.
The connection between these ancient purity practices and our modern concepts of hygiene.
Oh.
On one hand, it's clear that the ancient Israelites were onto something with their emphasis on washing and isolation. Those practices likely helped prevent the spread of disease, especially in a time before modern sanitation.
So in a way, their focus on cleanliness was practical and even life-saving.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that their concept of cleanliness went beyond just the physical.
Right.
It was deeply intertwined with their spiritual beliefs and their relationship with God.
So it's not a simple one-to-one comparison with modern hygiene practices.
Exactly. While we can draw parallels, we have to be careful not to conflate the two.
Right.
Their understanding of purity was much more complex and multifaceted.
It's a reminder that context is everything.
Yeah.
What might seem strange or superstitious to us today made perfect sense within their cultural and religious framework.
Right.
It's about understanding their worldview and beliefs, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
To fully appreciate the significance of these purity laws, we need to view them through that lens.
And it's important to note that these kinds of purity practices weren't unique to ancient Israel.
That's right.
Okay.
Many cultures throughout history have had similar rituals and beliefs surrounding cleanliness and purification.
Like what?
Think about baptism in Christianity or the ritual ablutions practiced in Islam.
Oh, yeah.
These are just a couple of examples of how the concept of ritual purity has manifested in different religious traditions throughout the world.
So even though the specific practices might vary, the underlying themes seem to be pretty universal. This idea of cleansing, purification, and seeking a state of spiritual wholeness resonates across cultures and across time.
And what's fascinating is that even though these practices are often rooted in ancient traditions,
Right.
they continue to evolve and adapt to changing social norms and scientific understanding.
That's a great point. It's not like these ideas are stuck in the past.
No.
They continue to influence us,
Right.
but they also change and morph as our understanding of the world evolves.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic process.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that's why it's so important to engage with these ancient texts and practices critically, to understand both their historical context and their enduring legacy.
Okay.
They can teach us a lot about ourselves and the human condition.
So what does all this mean for us today? How can we take these insights from Leviticus and apply them to our modern lives?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And I think a key takeaway here is to be mindful of how cultural ideas of purity and impurity might still be shaping our perceptions, behaviors, and even our social structures.
It's a call to examine our own assumptions.
Right.
And to question why we consider certain things clean or unclean.
Exactly.
Right.
For example, how do we view those experiencing homelessness or those with certain illnesses?
Yeah.
Do we unconsciously distance ourselves, perhaps reflecting a lingering sense of contagion or impurity?
That's a powerful question.
Yeah.
It challenges us to confront our own biases
Mm.
and to consider how these ancient ideas might be playing out in the modern world,
Right?
often in ways we don't even realize.
Yeah.
It makes you stop and think about how much of our behavior is driven by deep-seated cultural beliefs.
And beyond just personal biases,
Okay.
it's worth reflecting on how these notions of purity and impurity might be embedded in our social policies and institutions.
You're right. Do our laws or cultural norms inadvertently marginalize certain groups
Yeah.
based on outdated or unfounded concepts of cleanliness or purity?
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty sobering thought.
These are complex questions with no easy answers.
Right.
But by delving into these ancient texts and practices, we can start to uncover the deep-seated beliefs that continue to influence us,
Yeah.
often in ways we don't even realize. They can be an eye-opening experience.
It's like a journey of self-discovery and societal reflection.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it all starts with asking the right questions.
But I'm curious what happens when those ancient beliefs clash with modern science or changing social values. How do we navigate that tension?
That's a really insightful question.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have these two powerful forces,
right.
ancient wisdom and modern understanding,
Yeah.
sometimes pulling in different directions. How do
Exactly.
we reconcile those?
Right. It's easy to look back at those ancient practices and dismiss them as outdated or even superstitious.
Right.
But as we've been discussing, there's often a kernel of truth or practical wisdom hidden within those ancient traditions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Take, for example, the idea of social isolation during times of illness. That was a common practice in many ancient cultures. And while it might have had ritualistic significance, it also served a very practical purpose,
Oh.
preventing the spread of disease.
Uh-huh.
And we see that same principle at work today,
Yeah.
even though our understanding of disease transmission is far more advanced.
It's almost like we've come full circle.
Right.
We've rediscovered the wisdom of those ancient practices, but now we have a deeper scientific understanding to back them up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about physical health.
Okay.
Those ancient texts often contain insights into human psychology and behavior that are still relevant today.
Like what?
Think about the emphasis on ritual and symbolism in Leviticus.
Okay.
Those rituals, while seemingly strange to us,
Right.
served a powerful purpose. They help people cope with difficult emotions,
Yeah.
create a sense of order and meaning, and connect with something larger than themselves.
It's like those rituals provided a framework for understanding and navigating the complexities of life. Yeah.
Much like religion or spirituality do for many people today.
Right.
But how do we separate the timeless wisdom from the cultural baggage?
Right.
How do we know which parts of those ancient traditions to embrace and which parts to leave behind?
That's where critical thinking comes in.
Okay.
It's about engaging with these texts and traditions with an open mind, but also with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
We need to ask ourselves, what are the underlying values and beliefs that shape these practices? Are those values still relevant today?
Okay.
And do these practices align with our modern understanding of the world?
It's a process of discernment.
Yes.
We need to sift through the cultural layers and extract the nuggets of wisdom that can enrich our lives today, while acknowledging that some aspects of those ancient traditions might no longer serve us.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about finding the balance between honoring the past and embracing the present.
Right.
And that's not always easy.
Of course.
It requires careful thought and an open mind. One thing that struck me while reading Leviticus was the strong connection between purity and survival. The text emphasizes that the Israelites needed to separate themselves from their uncleanliness so they wouldn't defile the tabernacle
Right.
and ultimately die. It wasn't just about personal hygiene or social acceptance.
Yeah.
It was tied to their very existence and their relationship with God.
That's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
Purity was seen as essential for maintaining a harmonious relationship with the divine.
Right.
Their well-being, both individually and collectively, depended on upholding those rituals and maintaining a state of ritual purity.
Okay.
And it makes you wonder if some of that deep-seated fear of contamination or impurity might still linger in our subconscious today.
Right. Think about how we react to outbreaks of contagious diseases.
Yeah.
There's often a sense of panic, a fear of the unknown,
Right.
and a desire to isolate or protect ourselves from perceived threats. It's like those ancient anxieties about purity and contamination get triggered in times of crisis or uncertainty.
It's almost like these primal instincts shaped by centuries of cultural and religious beliefs resurface when our sense of safety and order is disrupted.
Yeah.
And it's not just about physical contamination.
Okay.
We see similar reactions to things that are considered morally or socially impure.
You're right.
Certain behaviors or beliefs are often labeled as toxic or contaminating to society.
Yeah.
There's this sense that they need to be contained or eradicated to preserve social harmony.
It's fascinating how the language of purity and impurity has evolved and adapted over time.
It really is.
It extends beyond the realm of the physical and into the realm of values, beliefs, and social norms.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that these ancient concepts, while rooted in religious practices, have a profound impact on how we view the world and interact with each other, even today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into Leviticus,
Okay.
I think the key takeaway for our listeners is this. Be mindful of the things you consider pure or impure in your own life.
Okay.
Where do those beliefs come from?
Mm-hmm.
Are they based on rational thought, personal values, or cultural conditioning?
Right.
And how do those beliefs shape your interactions with the world around you?
It's a challenge to examine our own assumptions and to consider how those deeply ingrained ideas of purity and impurity might be influencing our perceptions and behaviors, often in subtle and unconscious ways.
It's a journey of self-reflection and critical thinking,
Right.
but it can lead to greater understanding, empathy, and a more nuanced perspective on the complex interplay between religion culture and the human experience.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
Yeah, it has.
Leviticus might seem like an ancient text,
Right.
but it's clear that its themes and ideas are still relevant today.
Absolutely.
So as we go about our day, let's all take a moment to reflect on our own beliefs and assumptions about purity and impurity.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And let's remember that even those ancient traditions that seem most foreign to us can offer valuable insights into the human condition.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.